about to introduce our first keynote speaker today, Sir Sam Everington. Sam is a GP in the East End of London. And Sir Sam, I first came in contact with many, many years ago when I had the real privilege of visiting his practice in Bromley by Bow. And I have to say, it's an amazing centre that, for me, really encapsulates the type of care that I think proper general practice can provide. It's a hub that sits at the centre of a community and that has really worked in both in terms of not only improving health within that community, but actually community cohesion as well. And it's a wonderful place. Sam has been a leading advocate of the social prescribing movement for many, many years. In fact, many people identify him as one of the kind of founders, figures of that movement. He has an incredibly interesting background, and he started off in the legal profession before switching over into medicine. And we're going to hear from Sam today a little bit about his journey. Now, Sam is going to join us online today, and I'm just going to bring up the screen here just now. We can see him. There we go. Sam, welcome. I know you're joining us from Norway today, and unfortunately, you had originally planned to be with us in person, but can I tell you why Sam's not here in person? Sam's allowed me to share this with you today. Sam's godfather, unfortunately, passed away. So Sam's been back in Norway for his godfather's funeral. And Sam, I know how important he was to you and how influential he was to you as well. I think one of the lessons he taught you in life, if I'm correct, is that once you start something, you always see it through. And if you can hear me just now, and I hope you can, I would say to you that your godfather would be really proud of you today for seeing this through. So, Sam, welcome to the conference, and I'm going to hand over to you so that you can take us through your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. So, as a young GP, I realised that my training did not equip me to provide holistic healthcare to my patients. And I'm now on the board of NHS Resolution, which is the board that deals with medical negligence in England. And the bill every year is £2.7 billion and climbing. So I also know what harm some of our medicine can do. And I give you two challenges today. One is what makes you feel well? And I think if you think about that, and when I ask that question at conferences, most people never mention medicine or doctors or hospitals. They do mention things to do with their family, their community, nature, a whole raft of different things. And I also give you a challenge actually as a clinician, and this is a tough one, is are you a healer or are you a drug dealer? And that's a stark challenge, but it does make people sit up and think actually about what their role is, because I learned all those years ago that everything I learned at medical school, all very good and helpful, but was only going to deliver 20% at best of what patients needed. I am sorry I'm not with you today. I am in my homeland of Norway. My godfather died when he was 93, which is not untypical of Norway. And Gregor's exactly right. He would have wanted me to do this. He was always about living life to the full. And there is an interesting story about Norway and Scotland, and I will go into that with some of my presentation because it's exactly the same size population. Much of its geography is very similar, and yet its health is starkly different. And Gregor has touched on, I think, some of the reasons why there is a difference. But a simple statistic is the overweight and obesity level in Scotland is 4 times what it is in Norway. And I will touch on some of the reasons why that is. The key, though, to all of this is the social prescribing story. And people often asked me in the early days, in fact, there was a lovely meeting at the King's Fund where the Chief Medical Officer of England challenged me in this big meeting and said, well, I don't really like the word social prescribing because it sounds like socialism. And then somebody from public health challenged me because they said, well, it sounds biomedical. And I looked at that person straight in the face and I said, I'm going to tell you a secret. The reason we called it social prescribing was it was a secret conspiracy to re-educate all the doctors and nurses in the country using their language. And that made them laugh and think again about why we'd chosen that sort of term. But it's exactly the same as realistic medicine. And wherever you go in the world now, because social prescribing has become a very big movement, everyone has a different name for it. But it is about holistic healthcare. It is about what works. It is about focusing on what matters to people, not what the matter is with them. And it's bringing back that connection that Gregor talked to, which is your family, your community, and to nature. And one of the things then we therefore describe about Bromley by Bow, because I'm going to take you on a tour of Bromley by Bow and beyond, is so what's our mission? How do we describe our mission? And it's very simple. Is it about great outcomes, great medicine? No. It is about fun, friendship, compassion, and assume it's possible. And I hope that I can illustrate that and a lot of other ways that we come up with solutions, because most of this conversation needs to be less about the problem, more about the solutions. I'm struggling to, yeah. Can you see that next slide?
Lovely and clear.
Lovely. Okay. So I thought we'd also compare Japan because there's a fascinating story. One of the things I'd always say to you is everything we've done at Bromley by Bow and that I'm going to illustrate is what I call stolen ideas from other people. And so I always say to people when they come around our centre, steal anything you like, but do it in your model, using your passions, your energy, and your resources. So you will find social prescribing is different wherever you go in the country and around the world. A GP friend of mine in Leicester, for example, has got a police station in her waiting room, and she certainly doesn't have problems with patients in the waiting room. But actually, much more important, if you met those policemen, they would tell you two things. One is they're liked by the community. That's a new experience to them. And the other thing they'd say to you is they've reduced the crime rate on the local housing estate to 20% of what it was before. So actually, the solution here, the message I'm giving you here is think completely out of the box and work on where people's passions are and where people's relations are. So Japan is a really interesting story. So you've got the statistics up in front of you. So what is the difference? Why is it different to Scotland? And the answer is probably something very simple. And that is every single child gets a free school meal. It is a healthy meal, completely healthy meal. And in fact, they train one of the teachers, an extra 3-year master's course in exactly this. And it's why one of the campaigns I'm running as co-chair of the College of Medicine is to have a school nurse in every school. Because what I see in my really deprived community in the East End of London, which matches some of your communities, is the children that are not succeeding educationally, it's usually because of their health. And actually, it's also a secret of why the children are so well educated and so healthy in Norway, is there's such a strong focus in the school on that wider issue of your health and well-being. And what a lovely idea if you had a nurse who didn't just do weights and measures, but actually did the holistic healthcare, the mental, social, and physical health of every child in the school, not just those subject to safeguarding, and to have them actually on the governing board of every school. So there are simple solutions actually to quite a lot of our big problems. Looking at mental health, I thought I'd compare Norway and Scotland. as I said to you before, same size population. But look at the difference in antidepressant use, nearly a third. And interestingly, same population and 100 less suicides. So there are kind of two messages here. Is first of all, what's going on with all the antidepressant prescribing? And actually, do we have a problem? I think we do. And actually, anyway, is there any correlation between the use of antidepressants and suicide? And when you look more widely at the European studies, it's actually very difficult to see a correlation. And in fact, when I come on to talk to some of the evidence on social prescribing, particularly green social prescribing, we can show very clearly that certainly for mild depression, green prescribing works. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a few moments. And the other way round is that there's very little evidence that the antidepressants we use in mild to moderate depression have any really good benefit. And so actually what social prescribing does most of all, and I hinted at it because of what we call it, is actually change the way we work. And Gregor articulated that so well. It changes the way we behave as a GP. You know, if I've got a patient with depression, there's a very long conversation about your diet, your exercise, your family, all these sorts of things, way ahead of any drug prescription. This illustrates the level of harm that we can cause as doctors. And quite shocking, over 65s, depends on the hospital, but actually between 10 and 20% of admissions to hospital are as a result of drug side effects. There's something about the way we work. Normally, if I was with you, I'd ask you, if you had a terminal illness, would you want to die in hospital or at home surrounded by your loved ones? My godfather died at home surrounded by his loved ones. It's what he wanted. But 47% of people die in hospital from a terminal illness. And yet we know, because one of the roles I played with Simon Stevens, who was head of NHS England, was to lead the vanguard movement. And one of our vanguards reduced this to a third of what it was before. And we're doing this in Tower Hamlets. So we have 11 million local contract with our GPs, one part of which is to have a multidisciplinary team in every single practice where we proactively manage 5% of patients that are complex care, housebound, and terminally ill. And it gets you to behave in a very different way. So all my patients who are terminally ill get my mobile phone number, my email address. They can call me or text me anytime they want. Does it overwhelm me? Quite the opposite. I'm more likely to send them a text saying, you know, how are you? I haven't heard from you. But actually just holding their virtual hand, being that we were like all those years ago when I first started as a family doctor, is one of the most important things you can do. And it's the most powerful things you can do, not just for the patient, but for the family. That scared son or daughter, terrified of managing somebody who's terminally ill, but the pride on their face when they do it, and the less amount of bereavement, pathological bereavement when their loved one dies, is so visible. Typically, I had not so long ago a patient who rang me in the middle of surgery and said, look, my mum's just passed away. You hear from what I say that actually she was calm. I went round there, Bangladeshi family, very important, they're buried within 24 hours, brought the death certificate with me, signed it in front of her, and just sat there and said to her, your mother would be so proud of what you've done today, actually. And you've given her the best gift in life, which is a good death. And it's that sort of compassion that Gregor was talking about that actually, I think, is the absolute heart of how we should practice medicine. And this is a really frightening statistic. So certainly the difference between rich and poor in life expectancy is around 10 years. Interestingly, in Tower Hamlets, the life expectancy of women is now less than men in my communities. Who thought that would ever happen? And it's why the mayor of Tower Hamlets has given free swimming to all women over the age of 16. But even worse in some ways, actually, my godfather wasn't that worried about death. He was worried about the dying process. but actually he was much more interested in the quality of life. And this is, I think, the thing that we need to bring to everyone's attention, because this is something we can change. You know, by 2040, 1 in 5 will be living with major illnesses. And in the least deprived area, they'll hit that at the age of 70, and in the deprived areas by the age of 50. We have the possibility to give people 20 more years of high quality life. What a fantastic an opportunity, and what a fantastic challenge to the medical profession. Now, social prescribing, when we first started it 40 years ago, we were considered Guardian Reading, Sandal Brigade, complete nut jobs. Now, this has become established as so key to the way forward and is worldwide. I have done 3 international lecture tours already this year. There is a fascination and interest in this for all sorts of reasons. One, very clearly, because it is about good healthcare. 2, because it clearly does reduce the pressure on traditional medicine. And 3, because it starts tackling that gap that I talked about in terms of quality of life. So social prescribing, realistic medicine, the same question, what makes us healthy? Well, 40% is the social and economic factors, 30% is health behaviors, 20% clinical care, and 10% the physical environment. 20% of GPs visits are non-clinical. In some practices, much more. I would say it's more in ours. They always say that about 30% of our consultations are mental health. I sort of say that everyone is. Green social prescribing, as I described before, very good evidence that it works in mild depression. And all evaluations that we've done on social prescribing, quite a lot of this has been collated by the National Academy of Social Prescribing, show a reduction in health costs. And the best piece of research, you wouldn't be surprised if I pick on that, but it shows the possibility of social prescribing, up to 42% cut in general practice consultations. And really interestingly, with the same patients with social prescribing in primary care, up to 23% cut in A&E attendance. Now, social prescribing is strong in primary care, not as strong in hospital medicine, but at my local hospital, Royal London Hospital, a frustrated surgeon who was busy sewing people up with knife wounds said, I need to do something different, set up a charity, and everyone who comes in with a knife wound gets social prescribing for up to 6 months afterwards. And what he's shown is a reduction in reattendance in casualty with knife crime wounds from 33% to 1%. Because certainly in our communities, what we see is the people who are knifed are often the people who are doing the knifing. It's all part of the gang culture. Now, what's really fascinating about this piece of research is we all presumed that actually, of course, this was good for patients. We knew that. But actually, it's fantastic for clinicians. And this study's incredible. 95% believe social prescribing brings well-being to their patients. 98% believe social prescribing brings well-being to them as professionals. So it's greater benefit to professionals. But what this illustrates, and it illustrates, I think, with so many of our projects, is the win-win scenario. Social cohesion, which is what Gregor mentioned, is so much key to the solving the problem of the health of individual patients and the health of the nation. And this came into stark reality with me 20 years ago. We're about to have a remembrance ceremony at the BMA. I was the senior doctor on the site at the BMA, and I had to manage the bus bomb, and I did all the interviews that night. I was terrified there was going to be a backlash against my Muslim community. And I was able to say, well, there was lots of Muslim doctors who were helping out. But it did make me ask the question, why would you bomb somebody? Well, you bomb somebody because you hate them. Why do you hate people? Well, often because you don't know them. And so this is always the picture that I liked to show about Bromley by Bow, because I think it says exactly what we're about. Here you have a white young male sitting next to a Muslim traditionally dressed woman. Where would you see that in our society? And how good are we bringing communities together, particularly people who come newly to our country? And there again, great lessons to be learnt from Norway about actually how everyone who comes from another country has an integration program, which is all about supporting them around housing, about employment, um, to ensure that they get the best out of their now chosen country. Bromley by Bow is a great partnership between the private sector, the state sector, the voluntary sector, and the church. And this illustrates it. There's two things about this. This is the entrance to our centre. It's quite beautiful. There's no NHS signs. So we did have actually a Scottish health minister, John Reid, who was very upset about this. He wanted us to be branding the NHS. And we said, why would we want to do that? This belongs to the community. And he then said, and there's no signs telling people where to go. So I cheekily looked at him and said, yes, Minister, that's because we encourage our guests to get lost. And a lot of guests will describe a scenario when they come to Bromley by Bow and they don't quite know where to go. And two things happen. Somebody stops them and says, you look lost, how can I help you? Or you say to somebody, I'm lost, can you help me? And of course, I always like to say that the message for hospitals across our nation is to take all the signposts out, make sure all the patients get lost in the corridors, because the conversations that will happen will do an amazing amount for their health and well-being. This was paid for by Tesco's. So we asked them for some money. They paid 20,000. And typically for us, I then said to them, well, what can we do for you? And there was a bit on their face which was, well, you know, we're Tesco's. What could you possibly do for us? And we said, well, we've noticed in your local supermarket that you don't have many Bangladeshi clients. So we sat down with them. We showed them how to celebrate Eid and the various festivals and the sort of food products they should lay out to attract Bangladeshi clients. And there was a lovely moment a year later where I said to them, thank you for the 20,000. Now, how much did we give you? But there is a very strong message here, the importance of partnerships with all other sectors, but also a joint and fair and equitable partnership, which is always about two ways. Yes, we're happy to take people's money, but part of the deal has got to be, if you're going to have a long-standing partnership, to give back something in return. So you come into the centre here. It's a beautiful space. People think it's why? And so we put a lot of emphasis also on design. So there's a very strong message here in social prescribing about the way you design your health centres. Actually, our patients are scared when they come and see us. And sometimes we forget that because we see so much of it. It's either cancer, meningitis, or something else. And actually, the importance, therefore, in a beautiful environment and a fish pond with a little fountain. These things are normally what we would recognize in our normal lives as really important to make us feel better and more relaxed. But actually, often we don't translate that into the design of our buildings. And of course, the other key message here is certainly in England, I've seen a study which shows that NHS facilities are probably at best 80% used. And so there's another key message here, share your space. So we do at Bromley by Bow, and the bit that technically I pay the rent on is actually used by everyone else. In fact, the district valuer, when he came to see me originally, was very unhappy about this and said, well, this isn't general practice. And I said, well, tell me what the legal definition is. And of course, there isn't one. And then he said, oh, yes, but it's precedent. And I said, well, I can show you people around the country who are doing everything I'm doing. We just happen to be doing a lot of it in the same space. And he signed up at that moment, and that's 25 years ago, to the concept actually of general practice wasn't just about, as Gregor will remember, the red book, which defined the size of room and almost everything down to the T. This started life as the leg ulcer and flower arranging clinic. It isn't that anymore, but it's a lovely story about how we support everyone to be a leader in the process. So the district nurse came to us and said, look, I want to set up a leg ulcer clinic, lots of women with bad leg ulcers. And she said, I want to make it a flower arranging clinic. And we just said yes, which is what we always do. What she'd worked out was, yes, she knew now how to dress something really effective. And we spread this throughout the whole of Tower Hamlets. We've standardized the practice, and it's virtually unheard of now to get a leg ulcer in an elderly person. But what she recognized was actually bringing the joy back into people's lives. Somebody who'd got a leg ulcer had become immobile, depressed, their wounds smelt, they'd lost their self-esteem. Actually, what she did was bring the joy back into their life. And now they now call themselves Young at Art because they're now going into all sorts of art projects. And you come into our health centre, and the infection control police would freak at this because they say, well, you've got to have plastic surfaces which you can clean easily, completely ignoring actually the importance of mental health and well-being in the design of buildings. And you will see this concept going from hospitals. Yes, of course you need that in an operating theatre, but you really need that in general practice. So there's a very big message about design here. Sitting next to patients, having pictures of your family on the wall, really important, humanizing you. A sense of comedy, actually. One of the things I did in my early years was go to a course run by a child oncologist at Bart's Hospital, of all places, where he taught us laughter therapy. And I will never forget surgeons standing around and being forced to hold hands, uh, right, in their straight suits. It was amazing. But laughter and fun is really important. And it's not about telling jokes with patients, but actually just something. I had a patient the other day who was really very down and negative, and I just looked at him and I said, "You're going to die," and then started laughing, and he started laughing. There's something about bringing humor into everything you do really, really important. And of course, we've got the Olympics just down the road from us, so we have Paralympics. I'm not going to tell you who's the bank manager of a senior bank in the City of London or who is a patient, and don't make assumptions. We also do Paralympics in the park. Last summer, we sent a text using our Accurus system to all our patients, all 15,000 actually, related to this particular site, inviting them to a party in the park. And the park was absolutely packed. Yes, we were measuring blood pressures, we were doing face painting. It was a fantastic celebration for the community. This is our stone sculpturist. We have stone sculpture, a pottery, a lead window workshop, over 100 different projects on one site. Why artists? Well, artists is critical to your health. I often define that 80% that I talked about earlier on as finance, getting somebody a job, a good job, even better, education, their environment, the creative side of their life, and the spiritual side of their life. And this is the other 80% we help deliver at Bromley by Bow, and some of it virtually by connection with other people who are anchor organisations in the community. A jobs advisor in the park at that open event. Gardening on prescription. One of the things you might want to look at is the King's Fund report on gardening and health. If I can prescribe anything to my patients, it's either gardening or, for men, very much golf. This is our advocate, who isn't just an interpreter, knows the community. They all come and speak to her. She will sit in a consultation with me, and sometimes she will talk to them for 5 minutes and just look at me and say, Sam, they've got this, that, and the other. This is what you need to do. Every member of our team is a clinician. And I often say I'm not a brilliant doctor, but I am brilliant because of my team. And this is this at the front of our building, at the front of the cafe. This is our welcome zone. This is where the social prescribers hang out. This is where people can just walk in, use the computer, help themselves to a cup of coffee. There's little tiny consulting rooms off there where they can talk about anything private, but it might be they come in for their plumbing or anything. It's whatever matters to them, which is critical to this. We run a community university, so we run lots of different courses. We started life as a church, and the church is really important in all of this. This is my wedding 10 years ago. This is the vicar. He is now Lord Mawson. He's in the House of Lords. He and I have a passion for champagne, so you can see that the end of the service, it's him popping corks and serving champagne off the altar. And there was a lovely event 32 years ago when my adopted daughter was going to be baptized here. And my first wife, amazing woman, Chinese tiger mum, you might know these sorts of characters, and just looked at Andrew and said, well, Andrew, I've got a problem. I don't believe in God. And Andrew just looked at her and said, oh, Pui that's not a problem. Tell me what you want in the service. Very strong message here for the church. And a lot of churches get it and are absolutely anchor organizations of the community. In Norway, only 2% go to church regularly, but 40% get confirmed. So when I went to my godson's confirmation in Norway, actually, it was a non-religious ceremony in a church. And the churches in Norway have become the place for whether you are religious or not, or where you go to celebrate death, celebrate life, and celebrate marriage. This was a lovely project that we did, and because a lot of what we do is support people to be leaders. That's the key thing, and that's what I can't see you, I can't be with you, but what I know about you is that you are family, you are my family, and you are also leaders. And we supported 15 women and men to set up a project. And this was the competition day where the best one of the 15 was to win £1,000. And they all had to present in front of an audience of about 300 people. And the audience then would vote on who would get the £1,000. It was an amazing event. Two things I remember about it. Firstly, there was a woman who was clearly losing her voice. And you know that moment where you're terrified when you're speaking and you lose your voice, awful moment. But the love from the audience was amazing. And she got speaking again. And that will have changed her life. She will have become a leader. The second moment was that I was just about to get my credit card out and I just couldn't bear the thought that only one was going to win. But even I didn't know that the company in the city that had agreed to sponsor this actually had agreed in the end to give 1,000 to everyone. And of course, these 15 people are now leaders leading projects in the community. This is one of my GPs, run the DIY health project where we teach people to manage eczema, minor illness. What's fascinating, and published in the BMJ, we showed that that reduced consultations in general practice by 30% and in casualty, thinking out of the box. This was a friend of mine, James Fleming, in the Midlands, a GP, runs a course in schools all about food. This is a food conference at the Royal Society of Medicine in London. These kids, first time to London, first time public speaking, in an audience of 500 professors, you name it. And there was hardly a dry eye in the house because of the power of the message they were giving. Eden Project, a GP friend of mine, you've got all your examples, which Gregor has launched today. This is my co-chair of the College of Medicine, Mike Dixon, who's also the King's GP advisor and head of the whole royal household. How good is that? And is our patron of the College of Medicine, which is all about holistic healthcare. We're now working with farms, we're working with prisons. Great thing to look at in Norway. Why are the prisons, where the reoffending rate so low in Norway? And the answer is actually the prisons are absolutely designed around rehabilitation. This is Mike Dixon's surgery down in Devon. It's a medical herbal garden built by his patients. This is a project that reduced acute psychiatric admissions by a third simply by opening up a cafe 7 days a week staffed by mental health nurses. How powerful is that, and how is that thinking out of the box? So my theme at the beginning was connection to family. This is my family. We love wild swimming, and you might assume that's in Norway. No, actually, we have a family home in Scotland, and this is Loch Etive. And here it is. Beautiful, beautiful environment. There's nothing more beautiful than that, than the Highlands. Connection to family, connection to nature, and connection to community. And you might think that's in Norway. That's me and my wife in our Norwegian national costumes. The national celebration day is tomorrow, interestingly, and I will be back in London. And this actually is the Norwegian church in the East End of London. And we'll all be in our national costumes. We'll march to brass bands. That happens in every city across Norway. Virtually every class in every school has their own brass band. Absolutely vital for health. What does it teach them? It teaches them about doing things together. It teaches them the joy of music. And of course, my community on the west coast of Scotland is Port Appin. And fantastic things happening there around social prescribing. The local GP, now retired, Ian McNichol, amazing man. Guess what? Turned the shop that was closing into a co-op, kept the post office. Next to his surgery, there's support housing, there's community transport, there's a community history society, there's a community trust. They've now built a skiff. All these sorts of things, massively bringing the community together. And so social prescribing is possible in every single community. So I hope I've given you a sense, actually, what we've done and what's possible. There is nothing more important to us than the health of our people, our country, and our planet. And I believe that the leadership for this rests on many of us here today. Thank you.
My God, you delivered again. See what a wonderful guy this is. I mean, we spoke a little bit about connection, we spoke about belonging, we spoke about cohesion, but you can see what Sam has done for his community there, working with others to bring about that collective leadership and just improving, as I say, not just the benefits to people's health there, but actually the benefits to people's experience of life and of their community as well. Everything brought together. Sam, that was wonderful. It was an absolute tour de force. Can I check timings? I'm looking to the team. How long have we got? Have we got any time for questions just now? 10 minutes. Fantastic. Excellent. So, Sam, you happy to take some questions just now if we get into discussion?
Yeah, very happy.
I mean, I've got so many questions because if you and I have had a chance to chat, God knows how many times, and you've told me the story of everything. But I mean, the first thing is, how do you get the energy to keep on going?
Oh, well, for me personally, I was started my working life as a welder in a shipbuilding yard on the west coast of Norway. And a fellow student, friend of mine, died next to me when a crane came down on top. And it was a wake-up call for me. And I have this very strong philosophy that life is not a rehearsal. You need to do it now. And don't retire, never give up. You know, my godfather lived to that age simply because he never retired. Actually, his big family in his life was the Freemasons, and he was there the week before his death, actually leading a Freemasons event. So there's something about just keep that philosophy in mind. And by the way, you'll be a lot healthier and wealthier for it. It would be my message to everybody. Don't give up. And there's something around which I was going to mention, which is around leadership, which is really important. And that's I have, and I know the fact that all of you at this conference, a great sense of the importance of improving your environment, positivity. So we all like a whinge, but actually the energy comes from thinking positive, the cup overflowing. The team, absolutely critical. I get lots of energy actually from my team, whether it's my family or my team at work. I get great joy out of supporting other people to be leaders. It's those sorts of things which I think is really important. You have to ask yourself, what brings you joy in life?
There's a variety of questions that come in Slido just and before I go to the audience, just to invite them for any questions. I'm going to pick out one here just now, and it's quite a striking one, Sam, and you and I can maybe kind of have a little bit of a chat about it. The question is, who has the responsibility for prevention? GPs don't have the capacity for this. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that, and I'll maybe share some of my thoughts as well, but any response to that?
So there's kind of a mix. We all have responsibility. I've no doubt about it that if that was my earlier challenge. Are you a drug dealer or are you a healer? And if you're a healer, it's about prevention. Primary and secondary prevention is really important. But I think one of the things that we have done systematically over the years, and it's very addictive behavior, both by doctors and patients. Look, patient comes in, they've got a problem. I give them a drug. I'm happy because NICE tells me to do that. They're happy because they can carry on. They don't really need to do anything or take responsibility because they've got a drug that's going to solve the problem. So there's something inherent in all of this, which is handing back control to patients. I'm not there to tell patients what to do. And the patient smiled when I was encouraging them to give up smoking the other day. And, as good as to say, well, I'm not going to do it. And I just looked at him and I said, look, my job is to advise you. Your job is to ignore me. But give back control to patients. So all our patients in a deprived community measure their own blood pressure. They've all got their own machines. It's handing back control, and you're there to be a partner with the patient. So there's something philosophical about your relationship with patients. It's really important. It's why they know me as Sam. They don't know me as Sir or Professor or any of those other titles. I've never worn a tie in all my years as a doctor. It's actually about that focus on partnership. And when you do that, actually it will be less work for you. It's what I described earlier on as a win-win scenario. And the satisfaction you get out of it as a doctor, I think, is really powerful. Look, we are all intensely busy. 30 million consultations a month, that's equivalent of half the population being seen every month. Yes. But you have choices as a doctor as to what you do in the consultation, where you put your time and energy. You can't do anything. And all I would beg people to do is think about the choices that you make in every consultation.
I'll tell you a story, Sam. One of my learning points as a young, very enthusiastic and perhaps slightly naive GP when I started. And it was one of those textbook consultations that you're having. There's a man in his mid-40s in front of you. You've diagnosed him with high blood pressure for the first time. And he's overweight and he's, a smoker, slightly plethoric. And you think, yeah, I'm going to get this guy here. I'm going to set him on the road. And I gave him all the lifestyle advice about what he needed to do with his diet and how he had to lose weight. And he sat there in silence. And then he looked at me and said, Doc, when I get home on a Friday night, the thing that keeps me going through the week is I go out with my mates and I have a few beers with them and we go for a carry out. And then I go to the football on the Saturday and I have another few beers with them and we have a bit of a laugh together. If you take that away from me, what have I got left in my life? And it dawned on me at that point that actually the connection that you had with your patients had to be completely different. You had to be pragmatic. It had to be something which was real, that understood things from their point of view and what they were, how and why they lived the life that they led in that way. And I think that goes back to what we were saying at the start here about understanding people's not just the biology, but their story, their narrative, their biography, what's important to them, and working with them. And sometimes it's just about nudging them towards a healthier choice in their life, I think, more than anything else. Can I invite questions from the floor just now? Is there anyone who's got a question that... Nicola?
Thanks very much, Sam. I'm Nicola. I'm Gregor's deputy. I suppose I want to ask, you talk about healers and drug dealers, about whether we are A, selecting the right people to be healers, and B, where are we going wrong? Because I think we are going wrong in how we're training them, because we're training all of us to be drug dealers essentially, aren't we? Unless clinical training's changed dramatically. So yeah, how do we as leaders get into that space, I suppose?
Nicola, I think your challenge is entirely right. I don't think we're selecting the right people. I think there's no doubt about that. And that's shown about the numbers now not going into specialist training. Now, you can say that's just, it is also about the training, but there is something about who we're selecting. You know, I trained at the Royal Free. It used to be an all-female medical school. In my year, 50% of people had not come straight into medicine. I think there's a real challenge to us actually about whether people should, at the age of 17 or 18, go straight into medicine and not go and do something else first. So I think there's a key issue about selection. And so what are we selecting people for? So often the selection process is all about academia. You know, give us 3 A stars. Well, really? Actually, emotional intelligence is the thing we should be selecting for, certainly if you're going to be a GP, and that's going to be 40% of our doctors at least. I think the training is a massive problem. Now, I'm a professor at Queen Mary University. We now, between you and me, we're just at the beginning of the process. We're setting up a master's in social prescribing. We're going to be a faculty, effectively, of Queen Mary University. And guess what? We're going to be in the Arts and Humanities department. That's quite a surprise, isn't it, actually? But actually, the Queen Mary University has recognised that, you know, actually knowledge, which is how we learnt as doctors and is still the basis of so much of our teaching. Yes, you need an element of knowledge, but knowledge changes. You know, what I learned 40 years ago, well, probably 3 or 4%. It's the skills, you know, that, and it's your adaptability, it's understanding research, it's being a team leader. It's all these skills which are far more important. And Queen Mary University has recognised that, and recognises also that every single department in every university has something to offer to the training of medical students. So I think you need to turn it on your head. And finally, we've been piloting 4 years training in general practice. I would like to see it as 5 years. I do not understand why we hand over the training of our GPs to hospitals. Imagine an orthopedic surgeon having to spend 2 or 3 years in general practice before they become an orthopedic surgeon. It doesn't make sense to me. And I would like to see an option for people to come out of medical school, newly qualified doctors, to come and be trained for 5 years in general practice. Yes, have small slots in outpatients or in A&E or whatever, but absolutely base it from primary care. And of course, the beauty of this is I'm on BMA Council, and I can tell you one of the key things I keep on coming across all the time is the disconnection that junior doctors, that resident doctors feel. You know, in Gregor's and my time, we were part of a team. Yes, we were 84 hours a week, but we were part of a team. We felt part of a family. For most junior doctors, they go from one job to another, daytime to nighttime. Nobody cares, nobody loves them. Give me a doctor mutually selected for 5 years. They will be part of a family. They will be loved, supported, nurtured, and there will be a great focus actually on giving them the skills they need and focusing on the skills they haven't got. So, Nicola, fantastic question. I think we need to be anarchic about the training in medical schools and for our resident doctors.
Sam, I'm going to agree with almost every word that you say there, and I think particularly about our selection processes, we need to kind of think very carefully about how we're doing that. And the opening chapter, let me tell you, the opening chapter of my annual report this year actually reflects on that very subject that you're talking about, that connection and belonging at the beginning of our training. You're right, I was very fortunate in the connections that I was able to make working for the different firms that I did run about, hospitals. And we need to get back to that. Medicine, for me, is an apprenticeship, and the only way that you can do that properly is through proper connection with your mentors at that point in time. We need to somehow re-galvanise that at all. We're almost at the end here, but I want to ask you one last question from Slido here, because there's a number of themes here around about prescribing. And maybe you can just give me your thoughts on this. So there's a question here that says, why don't prescribers link over-prescribing with harm? Seems that there's a disconnect around over-treatment and harm in Scotland. And then there's a second question, which actually is about, are there incentives to avoid prescribing in Norway? Do Norwegian GPs fear the consequences of non-prescribing? It seems that in Scotland, that fear exists. I think we all recognise, I mean, that statistic that you showed there, of 10 to 20% of hospital admissions in over 65s are a consequence of adverse drug reactions. That's a well-known figure, and yet we seem unable to influence that or reduce that over time.
I think there is two things. I think we need to challenge NICE majorly. I think it's become, I'll be really brutal about it, become a disaster, actually, because, and it will show you in the small print, it talks about prevention and everything like that. But actually, it's a bit like the food industry now. You've got a pharmaceutical industry, absolutely drives prescribing. You have NICE that adheres to that. And you don't have the same incentives or pressures on everything else. So you fundamentally need to rebalance that. So one of the things that I've been talking to government about, because we had primary care networks for 15 years in Tower Hamlets, social prescribing, some of the things I've described. What we also need, I think personally, is an element of a local contract, which absolutely focuses on something local and gives the incentives, financial and others, in this other direction. I think then this issue of fear. So how do I address some of my fears? Well, and that's as a lawyer. And I can say to you, and I'm lucky, I've not had a single case against me that's gone to court or compensation in all my 40 years as a doctor. Now, that's not because I don't make mistakes. So what has stopped that from happening? And everything comes down to relationships with patients. If you have a relationship with a patient, it's where I can say to them, look, do you really want me to carry on, treating your loved one with lots of drugs or whatever? Or shall we have a conversation about a good death surrounded by the family? And it's when you had that and the continuity of care. And by the way, so 5 years ago, amazing study done in Norway, continuity of care, clear evidence of a reduction, or rather a higher pickup of serious illnesses like cancer and heart disease. Continuity of care is absolutely vital. I've made mistakes, and because patients know me and like me, first of all, I ring them up straight away and I say, I've got this wrong. And that's the first thing I tell every doctor to do. But what happens most of the time is they'll get an email from a hospital administrator 2 weeks later. Well, you've lost at that point. No, take their anger on the shoulder, in a phone call, tell them what's happened, and you'll be amazed how patients are forgiving and how trusting they are of you as an individual. So I think it's two things, but it comes down to the relationships. And also the final message there is you hand over the decision to the patients. It's their decision about whether to take medicines and things like that. And if they feel they're making the decision and you've given them the pros and cons and everything, well, guess what? That's far less likely to rebound on you. And finally, don't live in fear. If you live in fear with patients, you'll never have joy as a doctor or nurse.
Sam, I wish we had longer to kind of speak and to kind of take advantage of the wisdom that you're imparting today. I've had the real deep pleasure of visiting the Bromley Bible Centre on a number of occasions, and the pictures that Sam showed today is exactly how it feels when you walk in. It is the most beautiful, peaceful surroundings. Now, it wasn't always on, but that centre was developed through the hard work and the continual, relentless focus of people like Sam. And I know he didn't do it by his own, but my goodness, he drove that place to become the centre that it is just now. And when as soon as you walk in, there's a peacefulness in the gardens that is just beautiful. In the centre of essentially kind of Tower Hamlets, East End of London. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Thank you for sharing your story with us today, Sam. I think it's an important facet of what we're trying to do in Scotland. I would love to see more places like Bromley by Bow appear in Scotland. We've actually got one or two that actually are fascinating developments that I would love to show you at some point. But for now, can I just say thank you on behalf of everyone here today, and safe journey home when you travel back across the North Sea.
And thanks very much, Greg. And just to everyone, you are entirely welcome. We have lots of people who come round, have coffee and tea with us. any of you are welcome if you're down in London to come visit us.
And it's a good cup of coffee you get as well. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers.